Good day and welcome to this discussion in this roundtable on Budget 2020. Although a lot has happened since, so it might be a broader discussion than that. We're privileged to have with us Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Heng Keat at the center. Next to him is Linus Goh, who is Head of Commercial Banking at OCBC Bank. On his left is Toby Koh, Group Managing Director of Ademco, a securities company. And to my left is Dr Faizal Yahya, Senior Research Fellow at IPS, the Institute of Policy Studies, which is a prominent think tank in Singapore. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to this discussion.
Thank you.
I know there's so many things to talk about, but I think on top of the agenda is, I think, two shocks that we have recently faced, at least two shocks. One is the coronavirus, and the other is the resulting economic and financial stresses that we are beginning to see. So before we go into the budget issues, can we just have a broad assessment of the impact of these developments on Singapore currently and going forward? DPM?
Well, even before the outbreak of the coronavirus, the global economy is already slowing because of the trade tensions between the US and China. And I think this outbreak, together with an already slowing economy, will have a fairly major impact on the global economy. In fact, it has been just 3 weeks since I unveiled the budget. But in the 3 weeks, the developments globally have been more negative for the economy as well as for the outbreak of the virus. So first, if you look at the outbreak, it seems to be going in waves. You have a first wave that hit China and Singapore and a few countries very quickly. And we have sort of been able to contain it reasonably well with our ministerial task force, with all the measures that we have taken. But it is by no means over. So we have to continue to be extremely vigilant during this period. But the outbreak is also spreading like a wave to other countries. You're seeing it in all our major partners, and in all the major economies. The European Union, Japan, and the US. And this, we don't know how this wave will move. That in turn is triggering concerns in the global financial markets. So I've been monitoring our global financial market movement very closely. And I think uncertainty has grown significantly. And sentiments have fallen. And that in turn is affecting investments, is affecting consumption, and is affecting the linkages across the economies. So you have these two major negatives coming together at the same time, interacting in ways which are quite difficult to predict. But I would say that compared to 3 weeks ago when we were doing the budget, I think the situation today is worse. And that is a reason why since about 10 days ago, we've started working on the need for a second package to stabilize our economy and to emerge stronger from this. So we are working very hard at this. In fact, I just had a discussion with Prime Minister yesterday on the key measures that we will need in this package. And my colleagues and I are working very hard together with the ministries on what else we need to do. So we have to continue to be very vigilant to look at this wave and how we need to stay on top of this development in the global economic data and so the global financial markets. Financial markets have been roiled in very significant ways. The last time I see this such sharp movement was when I was managing director at the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And it is, the speed at which contagion can spread is something that we all have to be very vigilant to.
Before we go into the package, which sounds very interesting, DPM, could I get a sense from you as well as the other participants on whether you think there's a likelihood of a global recession and how deep it will be?
Well, first of all, the global economic growth will come down from the earlier projection. In fact, it has been trending down over the last few months because every new set of data that comes in has been negative. And the global economy is much more integrated today than it was, say, during the period of SARS. China is a much bigger player in the global economy. And in terms of China's linkages to the rest of us in the world, but particularly to Singapore and to Southeast Asia, it has been much more extensive. The global supply chain is also much more integrated than before. So sectors which are most directly hit, like aviation, tourism, and food and beverage and retail, were the first wave to be hit most directly. But because the global supply chain is so integrated, this is also affecting the supply of key components across the different economies. And I think this is going to have ripple effects on the manufacturing sector as well.
Right. So, any other views? Linus, from a banker's viewpoint, do you see a global recession?
I agree. We have, over the past 5-6 weeks, been actively reaching out to the SMEs, particularly the small businesses.
Right.
So in that time, I think we've covered maybe over 2,000 of these small businesses. And you're right, absolutely. What started very narrow in the travel and tourism sectors has now kind of expanded very quickly into all the other industries. The first instance was just the ones that were affected by footfall and consumer spending in markets like Hong Kong and Singapore. But now it is much more broad-based, so the manufacturers are also feeling the strain because of the disruptions to the supply chain. And it's also now becoming a question of weakness in demand. So while they may solve the supply chain issues by looking at alternate sites, the reality is demand has also come off. So it is now going broader and going deeper.
Right. What do you think, Toby, I know your business is booming, but what do you think, looking around you at other businesses, what do you feel about whether this is a recessionary phenomenon?
I think that, undoubtedly the data is all pointing to, a slowdown in the economy globally. So it is going to hit us, and I think we've got to be prepared for it. For example, in China, my business is pretty much at a standstill. So we're badly affected in China. So we're still maintaining a headcount of 140 people, and that headcount has got to be there to be ready when the economy rebounds. But on the other hand, we're not seeing any effects right now in markets like our Indian business, in the Philippines, in Indonesia. Everything is as per normal. We're still coming along. We're getting contracts. It doesn't seem like the virus has really hit them that hard. It's surprising. I think it's just a matter of time, before the effects come in. But in the security space, maybe a little bit more resilient, through the economic cycles. But undoubtedly, I think that we are in for a downturn.
And Faizal, if there is a recession, God forbid, but if there is one, how would it impact Singapore, and which groups would be most affected?
I think we just had a roundtable with small companies, DPM,
Yes.
and from their point of view, they were already badly hit because of the trade war, trade tensions before the COVID. So now the message would be, if whatever you're doing now, just the rental waivers, wage support, tax support, rebates, please do more. Okay, they would like to see and to like to hear some good news, if possible. Like you mentioned, the waves, or in terms of the hit, in terms of the COVID. Would the first wave, for example, recover faster? That includes China, to instill some sort of recovery that can kick in,
Right.
And from their perspective, there was mentioned by the government that essentially this downtime can be used for training and refurbishment and automation and so forth. Right. So they would like to see some, more of that kind of strategy as well. But at the same time, to help them to survive.
So you raised two very important points. One is, first, how we can all come together to not just survive, but to prepare for the upturn.
Correct.
And on that point, the government must do our part. Right? So whether it is the reduction of property taxes or the major job support scheme, but I will urge all businesses to each do their part. Okay. Because, for instance, between the landlords and the tenants, it is important for landlords to take action to help to safeguard the business interests. Because if the shops remain viable in the long run, everybody benefits.
Correct.
So we have to take a long view and not take a short view on just saving ourselves, but we need to save others. And in that, we have to do it together. We're all on the same boat. And it does not make sense to say that, I have this and you have this. I think we need to come together. So whether it's landlord and tenants, whether it's banks and your clients, there will be small businesses in particular which are viable, and therefore we need to support them as fully as possible. And as you said, different markets have different dynamics. In China, it's a lockdown, but at the same time, in India and other places, your business is booming. Now, even in China, they are now beginning to look at how they can unlock Wuhan. They had a big lockdown of Wuhan, and now they are taking a very risk-based approach to look at how they can unlock Wuhan. So the first point is how we must come together, take a risk-based approach, and as the situation warrants, we either tighten or we loosen so that we do not have a total standstill. Your second point, which is important, is that not only should we work together, but we should look at what's ahead. And in particular, how do we use this downtime to prepare for the upturn? Training, for example, is one key area. And I think we should be looking at new ways of doing things. So for instance, I recently met an entrepreneur who was in the video conferencing business. And he said, I'm doing really well. I said, what happened? He said, well, everybody is avoiding meetings, and therefore I have lots of business. So his comment triggered a thought. And I also met a businessman who has operations in China. He was initially very upset that his workers were out of action and locked down in their dormitories for 2 weeks. And after a day, he decided that, well, how do I make the best use of this time? So he used the time to do remote learning. So the workers were in their dorms, and everyone was doing remote learning. So I think we should turn this adversity into opportunities, turn the weakness into a strength, and make the full use of this time, this downtime, to really realize this goal.
But DPM, can we come to your package that you had mentioned, that you're exploring a second package? And this is what you said in the budget, that if the COVID-19 situation becomes worse and its economic effects get magnified, you have the will and the resources to do more. So do you think the time has come for you to do more? And if so, can you share something about what it would be?
Yes. Well, we will certainly need to do more, because as I said, in just a few weeks since the budget, the global economic situation has taken a turn for the worse. And even the outbreak of the coronavirus has taken a turn for the worse. It is now spreading in different parts of the world, and it will have a significant impact on the global economy. How significant it is, which countries will be most affected, it is not possible to tell at this stage. It depends very much on how well we cooperate globally to first and foremost tackle this outbreak. And that must be our first priority, and that is our first priority in Singapore. But at the same time, we must look at how we can revive the economy, and there are some areas of strength which we must build on, and there are areas of weakness which we must support so that it does not get much worse. So in terms of what we have in mind for the second package, first of all, let me say that the budget itself has very major measures for stabilization and support of the economy, for support of households, and as well as the transformation, the transform and grow. So I was at the Chinese, the Cao Bao event, where business leaders say, oh, you have a 4083 package, 4 billion for the economy, stabilizing the economy, and 8.3 billion for transform and grow. So I think that number will change a little. It will be higher in that.
Which part will be higher?
Well, I'm looking at the first one being much higher, but also the second, much higher in terms of the relative increase, but also some bits relating to the transform and grow, which, as I mentioned a few weeks back, that we should aim to emerge stronger. And there are several areas which I think that the this outbreak now shows us the need of the global economy. If we can be first off the block to innovate, to make innovation pervasive in our society, in our economy, we can respond to this new situation very dynamically and come out with innovations that will meet the needs of Singapore, but also the world. So first, in terms of the support measures, our topmost concern, of course, is our workers. Because if our workers can keep their jobs, then the consumption can resume and life can take place as normally as possible. So that will be one key aspect of it. And two, our small and medium enterprises, in that how can we support our small and medium enterprises to make use of this downtime to really strengthen their capability and at the same time to tide over immediate short-term difficulties. And for that, we need to work together with the banks, with the key partners, with our trade associations and chambers, because this is not something which can be done just by one or two companies and just between the government and the company. This is something that has been done together with the banks, together with the companies, together with the trade associations and chambers. Now if we can do that well, then I think the entire industry and the entire economy can emerge stronger in the longer run. And the other aspect is after the outbreak, there are many more people who have been self-employed, and they are now having difficulties in managing this. So we're looking at how we can provide some support to our workers who have either chosen to be self-employed or have done a variety of jobs, mostly because it's much more flexible. So there's those who do it part-time in order to earn some extra money. There are also those who do it full-time because it suits the nature of their job or it suits their lifestyle better. But we have to rethink this whole model to look at how we can strengthen it better so that when you have a downturn like this, how can they be better protected? And in particular also, when you have an upturn, how can they be ready for the upturn? Because if they're operating individually, the need for training, the need for upgrading, the need to use technology better may not be obvious to them individually. But if we can bring them together in some ways, then I think everybody will have a better sense of their common needs, and we can then look at how we can have more innovative solutions to meet these needs. Right. So those will be the key elements.
Okay. Linus, DPM mentioned that the government can't do it alone, and the others also have to play their part.
Yes.
Could you tell us about how banks, or particularly OCBC Bank, is dealing with the stresses that you're seeing in your clients, both on the consumer side and the enterprise side?
Well, I think we are clearly very conscious that this is an effort that we all have to come in together. Right. It is not only our responsibility as a banker to the community, but also our social responsibility. In February, we announced our own package of tailored support for our customers, both individuals and businesses. And that support was around having some flexibility into their existing commitments. So in the event that they would need to restructure or to have some moratorium on their principal repayments, we would entertain those requests. At the same time, I think for the SMEs particularly, we have seen quite a number who have been impacted by the disruptions in global supply chain. So therefore, their trade bills and their invoice financings may have requests for it to be termed out a little bit longer to account for the delays. There have also been customers who have sought additional working capital or bridging loans to tide them over this short term. So I think in that light, we are very much in line, and I think we're very happy with the announcement of the enhanced working capital financing loans. The outreach to our SME customers has so far come back with quite positive reaction to those schemes. So the uptake, I think, will start to grow quite quickly over the next few weeks. But I think the question now is more that, as you said, DPM, that if it goes deeper and broader, then how can that support be then, enhanced to be relevant not only for the first-line industries that are in the travel and tourism type sectors, but also to the broader economy. Yeah, and I think there are many who have raised the question of whether a bridging loan, more akin to what we had launched in the global financial crisis, of a larger sum that would then take care of some of the uncertainties and tide them over a longer period of time. I think that is something that companies are looking for, and then with that, then they can focus on the other efforts that they need to do to transform and emerge better after.
Right. Yeah. So in terms of dealing with uncertainty, if there are various measures that we can consider, we can explore. Bridging loan is one of them, but I would suggest that we also look at more broadly how we can have some structural solutions to this problem. During the global financial crisis, trade dried up, not because there was no demand, but because trade finance and trade insurance dried up. And trade finance and trade insurance dried up because there was a lack of confidence on both parties. Buyers were not confident that the sellers would deliver the goods, and sellers were not confident that buyers will deliver the money. But today, with the digital technology and digital payment system, in fact, you can have some assurance, particularly with a trusted third party, that my goods have left my port, the goods are halfway, in the sea, and the goods have arrived at the other port. So the tracking and tracing of goods in transit is now possible, and therefore the flow of finance and flow of data can be much better integrated, and the flow of insurance can be much better integrated. For us, we have started our network trade platform, and we are in the midst of trial with some major ports in the world, particularly in China. And we should work together to see how we can facilitate this flow so that trade finance and trade insurance should be done very differently. Our banking system should be much more digital, and in that process, I hope that all our banks come on board this movement, work together with us on our network trade platform to look at how we can finance, we can provide trade finance and trade insurance, particularly to our SMEs. And in that way, you're actually not taking higher risk because the data flow and the flow of goods are now far better integrated. So it's looking for better solutions. Yeah.
So Faizal and Toby, if you could just give us your wish list on what you would like to see in terms of additional measures. This time.
I think that, I appreciate the fact that, the priority of the government is to protect the jobs. I think extremely important.
Right.
And I think that, we should look a little further and encourage companies to do some hiring, increase their hiring at this point in time.
Indeed.
In fact, there are a lot of SMEs who are still very healthy, who would still actually would like to hire, but they're holding back.
Yeah.
Perhaps, maybe enhance in the enhanced budget, to have a little bit of a wage sharing or wage support for any new headcount that these companies are going to bring on board. That will encourage good SMEs, strong, healthy SMEs to start hiring right now because there's going to be talent out in the market. So let's see whether that's possible. Then, we can encourage people to create jobs and at this point in time. I think that's one. Second thing would be, I think a lot of the SME business owners that I've spoken to very concerned about cash flow. And I think that, the things which, for example, like what Linus has said, the support from the banks to have moratorium maybe on the principal repayment of, property loans or, so for 6 months, just to ease that cash. Right. Perhaps even a moratorium on, tax payments, right? So something like that just to ease the cash so that, they're able to go out there and continue the business, keep the headcount without having to disrupt, their operations.
Right. So that's a very good point in terms of how the hiring can continue. And in fact, in the budget which I unveiled earlier, there is a special program for hiring of those between 40 and 60. And also enhance credit for SkillsFuture training, enhance the program. And I gave a very specific example of how even a course that costs several $1,000s with SkillsFuture credit and with the grants from the existing program, which is up to 90%, essentially the individual pays zero. and still have some money left in the SkillsFuture credit of $500 before the top-up. So I hope that companies that are looking at the long term will take this opportunity to hire, and in particular for this group in the 40 to 60 who many of them may have been displaced from existing jobs. I think with this downturn, there may be more in various groups that will be affected. And I think the redistribution of our very scarce labor to productive users can continue. And what you have said is exactly that we should do more of that. And we'll be happy if companies were to do more of this, because take this opportunity to train, develop the new skills, and prepare for the upturn.
Faizal, your wish list?
Our wish list is plenty, but maybe from a small company's perspective, it's great that the government takes up some of the loan risk, higher loan risk, but essentially the interest bank charges for the interest rates are still pretty high compared to those given to bigger companies. So it impacts on the cash flow issues. So, is there a means whereby the government can actually do more work with the banks to actually bring down those interest rate charges, perhaps, In terms of the employment side, I mean, it's great what the government is doing now, but something like absentee payroll to pay the companies for the absentee headcount while he or she goes for the courses.
Right.
I mean, they're doing some sort of measures now, but can that be increased?
Right.
Essentially, especially for those PMETs who are getting more displaced and find it hard to get jobs, can that be done as well? So I think essentially, okay, and the point is that this impact in terms of the budget, that you mentioned earlier, the 5 sectors were targeted in terms of the huge impact that they had due to COVID-19. But it's not limited just to the 5 sectors. So what can be done more for the 5 sectors and those that are related to those 5 sectors? Companies would want to have some indication, whether there's help coming in your second tranche, DPM.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think on your third question about if the impact is broader, what is it that we should do?
Yep.
So in fact, in the stabilization and support package that I announced at budget, there were 2 elements. One element is broad-based support for the entire economy.
Okay.
So for instance, the job support scheme covers the entire economy, not just the 5 sectors.
Right.
The 5 sectors have additional measures to support them. So we, again, will have to take a targeted approach. We'll take both a targeted and a broad-based approach.
Okay.
Broad-based to support the whole economy. And in particular, when we say that we're supporting, our priority is supporting workers, the economy is very interlinked.
Yes.
So if workers are able to keep their jobs, they will continue with their consumption, and that in turn flows into the shops and the retail outlets and our F&B outlets.
Yep.
And there are also other measures, like for instance, Minister Massagoh started the SG Clean campaign. I was in my constituency giving out one of these labels to a coffee shop that has got has gotten this standard. And I was very happy that our shop owners as well as our hawkers understand why that is important. Because if you can assure customers that my premises is properly cleaned and that the risk is low, then I think there will be confidence for consumers to come. And so it is not just 1 or 2 measures, but putting these different measures together to instill confidence, but at the same time maintaining vigilance. So if I know that the shop that I'm going to has taken care of all this, I feel a lot more confident to go there and eat. And in turn, if I can keep my jobs, I'll feel confident about spending. And that is how we can keep the economy running. Now, as to your question about interest rates, first, your absentee payroll, again, the package that we have rolled out for the 40 to 60 have a strong element of this, and I hope that companies make full use of this. And if there's a need for us to consider particular groups, we will consider. But at this stage, I think let's make the best use of what is available. One comment which came out quite often is that companies and individuals compare and said, so for instance, I had somebody who wrote to me on my Facebook that why is it that your SkillsFuture credit is the top up and the doubling of the SkillsFuture credit is only for those 40 to 60-year-old. And so I checked the data and found that, I rechecked the data rather, because when we were considering this, the data that was given to me is that for those, in fact, very few people have made full use of the SkillsFuture credits. And for those above 60, the usage is even lower. So I said, rather than look at comparing what you get and what I get, if what I have already given, I'm not using it, then I think we should focus on using it well, rather than saying that, how come you have 2 pieces of bread and I only have 1, but I'm actually not even eating my bread. So I think it is important for us to utilize it. And I'll be very happy if there's full utilization of all the SkillsFuture credits that we have. And in particular, if companies make full use of this, we also have a very special SkillsFuture credit for enterprises. So the enterprises that are transforming can also make use of this. So one of the hotels that I visited recently this was the Park Raya Kitchener Road. They were already doing their transformation effort. They started a year ago. So with the COVID-19 outbreak, the hotel was relatively underutilized. So they have all these workers, they kept their workers and used this opportunity to retrain. But because they were clear about what they were retraining workers for and how they were redefining that job, they found it very handy and they were able to move very quickly. So we cannot just deal with the problem and say, this is a short-term problem, this is a long-term problem, I deal with the short-term first. But very often when you deal with a long-term problem like what they were doing, their long-term problem was the shortage of workers in Singapore. But when the outbreak happened, they then took the opportunity to accelerate their transformation. So in the same way, even if you deal with a short-term problem now, I think if we position ourselves for how we can emerge stronger, then I think it will be a full suite of activities that we can raise our capabilities significantly.
And the interest rates.
DPM, I want to come back to the jobs issue in a moment, but before that, I want to give Linus an opportunity to respond to Faisal's point about
on interest rates.
Interest rates, yes, that's right. Sorry.
Why are
Interest rates will never be low enough.
Why are SMEs being charged such high interest?
I think the reality is the global interest rates are coming off. I mean, the central banks are responding to what is a weakening global demand issue, and so interest rates are coming off. Borrowing costs will be coming off. I think the banks, in reaching out to SMEs, are already improving the offers out to the SMEs. So I believe we have something that will meet needs. In fact, in our outreach to our SME customers, already more than 25% are coming back proactively to take up the loan. So I think that gives a sense that we are meeting needs where it's at.
But can the banks do more in that? Because interest rates are set essentially based on the risk of the lender, right? Of the borrower. And if the banks can come and work together, whether with the SME or with the industry, to lower the risk either of the entire industry or of the specific company, then if you take a risk-based approach, the interest rates can then be calibrated according to that. So if you have some ways in which the SME themselves also undertake action to lower its risk, then the interest rates can be favorably considered, right?
Yeah, very much so. So I think to take the point that you were raising earlier on about the network trade platform,
that's right.
There are many efforts that we are working on today, leveraging the data that we have, enabled by digital connectivity. Right. So inside there, you have very clear understanding of orders that are made by anchor buyers, the relationship to their suppliers who are SMEs, the recurring nature of those trades, the stability of the orders that come, certainty of repayment. So all of those are already measured differently. So therefore, better risks are treated with better pricing.
So I would suggest that perhaps our banks can work together with let's say, the Association of SMEs and do some online training for our SMEs to talk about what do we mean by a risk-based approach. Because banks will be happy to lend to companies if the risk is commensurate, with the returns. And in order to expect the banks to have lower returns, it means that the risk should be lowered. So what is it that each SME can do and the trade associations together can do to lower the risk? And if we can do that, everybody benefits.
Yes.
And we should be creative about looking for such solutions.
Right. Yeah. I think one positive that has come out since the beginning of this year and more since the end of January has been the significant uptake in digital adoption.
Yes.
So whether it's digital banking or even beyond banking solutions, customers inquiring about digital invoicing, matching of orders and payments. So the time is right, so we can leverage these capabilities. We have lots of data previously not used, now very useful, that can help SMEs to take advantage of their situation, to be not only to avail better solutions, but also to build a better business. Right, because they can direct the orders and the business that they do towards a better risk profile.
So on that point, just interestingly, I think you're aware that I spoke about an emerging stronger task force under the Committee on the Future Economy. And we are in the midst of putting out these challenge statements as to what are the challenges worth solving that will benefit. One of the areas which I hope that will be worth solving is certainly how we can support our SMEs better. And there are several ideas which we are looking at. One is that if you look at SMEs operation, they have many common elements. Everyone needs to take orders from customers. In turn, they need to manage their inventory. And the inventory then turns into how they can order the fresh products. They need to do accounting. They need to do auditing. They need to report statements. If they need to pay workers, if they hire workers, they will need to transact with the Ministry of Manpower. If they need to pay special levies, they will need to do that. So there are a whole series of administrative transactions which involve all SMEs. And I hope that audit firms and the accounting firms can come up with solutions that will allow for this to be done much more efficiently, not just for one or two SMEs, but for thousands of SMEs. And this will be a challenge worth solving. The other is what you mentioned about risk management. Can we bring the industry together and find ways in which we can do so, for instance, through digital platforms like what you mentioned, through the network trade platform. Then we can put it out as a challenge statement. And in my capacity as chairman of National Research Foundation, I'll be prepared to support measures that will create that sort of innovation. So we are in the midst of putting out these statements. So all of you are welcome. And this will be one of those which I'm happy to support.
DPM, if I may come back to the issue of jobs.
Yes.
I think the government's emphasis seems to be to prevent retrenchments as much as possible. And that you have a lot of measures in the budget, although they are time-bound. And also, we are aware that NTUC's mantra is we should cut costs to save jobs, not cut jobs to save costs.
Yes.
All that said, we might be in for a long crisis. The medical experts said COVID-19 could last the whole year.
Yes, indeed.
In that event, God forbid, if there are retrenchments, if those happen anyway, what measures can the government come up with to give relief to retrenched workers?
Yes. So our approach is first and foremost to prevent retrenchment, not just for the sake of the workers, but also that I think the companies must take a long view, because for them to just retrench workers at the slightest sign of problem will create longer-term problems for the company as well. Because the workers whom you know well, who are familiar with the operations of the company, who can be upgraded to do a higher level job, would have lost all that experience. So I think it's important for companies to take that long view. Now that said, the reason why we are supporting this our job support package for our workers is that we think that if companies face an immediate short-term challenge like this and they don't have the resources to manage it and they start retrenching, they would also be reducing their own capabilities, and therefore it will make any upturn a lot harder for them. So that is the first priority. But the second is that if the companies indeed found that the business model is no longer viable, then I think the releasing those workers to new industries that are growing will be important. And that is where you mentioned about some of the businesses, some of your sectors, they're actually growing. So there will be sectors that will be growing. And in particular, for workers at all levels, whether they are fresh graduates going to join the different sectors, or whether they are older workers who have to retrain for another job, being able to support all our workers in that, and that in turn will support our companies in building their capability, will be very important. Now, as for workers who are then retrenched, we're looking at specific measures that may help them, over this period, and I'll be announcing details of this later. Yeah.
Is this part of the package that will be coming
Yes,
out?
this will be part of the package. Yeah.
Okay, very good. You had also mentioned that companies should make the most out of what is available.
Yes.
And I think there are so many schemes that have been launched. Apart from industry transformation maps, there's a productivity solutions grant, there's the SME Go Digital program, etc. And some of these you've enhanced in the recent budget.
Right.
But I think a lot of people make the point, I think, which you just made, that the problem is not the shortage of schemes.
Right.
The problem is that these schemes are not being used sufficiently.
Right.
And I think, Faizal, you had an article about 4 days ago where you said that SMEs are running into bureaucratic obstacles in getting access to some of these schemes, apart from the interest rate point.
Sure.
Apart from that, so you had mentioned this. Could you elaborate on what kind of obstacles they're facing?
I think basically what they've fed back is, the process of approval and assessment is far too long.
Right.
And you'll miss that window of opportunity
Right.
that they might get, essentially we know that the bureaucrats are stretched, but some of these sectors are very advanced or innovative, and the bureaucrats might not know the type of business model that could actually vary in the same sector as well.
Right.
So this kind of knowledge, industry knowledge is not there. So it's fine deep to talk about going digital, but the ecosystem of the company, the culture in terms of the uptake and the leadership, which I think you've addressed partly in terms of the budget here, were elements that were missing if they mentioned from earlier budgets that talk about going digital.
Right.
So the awareness is great, and the uptake also is a problem because they have not assessed the health and the complexity of their own processes.
Right.
So if they just jump on the bandwagon and get a technology or a gadget that's expensive, it becomes a white elephant.
Absolutely.
Without the human capital or the leadership to actually see it through in terms of the transformation.
Yes.
Yep.
So that's a very good point, and that is why, as part of the Committee of the Future Economies work,
Right.
we started this 23 industry transformation maps. We now have a better understanding, and the key idea behind the industry transformation map is not only do we bring the industry together and to solve common challenges, but we solve the challenges in an integrated way, rather than in an integrated way, in a company-centric way, rather than our former approach, which is agency-centric. So the agency that is encouraging companies to train workers will go and say, well, why don't you take a grant to train workers? Yes. And the agency who is encouraging companies to adopt technology solutions say, why don't you adopt technology solution? So I had a business leader who spoke to me at the early stage of the CFE work, and he said, Minister, why are your agencies going around getting companies to take grant?
The KPIs.
Is it a KPI? So he said there was an agency who came to me to look at how we can train our workers, and another agency came, unknown to him, that 2 weeks ago another agency came to ask me to adopt a tax solution. So if I have adopted a tax solution, I would have to train my workers very differently, and in fact I may not need to train as many workers, and I would need some way to release the workers to other sectors. So as a result of all this discussion, this Secretary General Ng Chee Meng at the NTUC side have also created this scheme to have both the Company Training Committee and the Jobs Security Council where companies which are going to release workers are able to tell us in advance how many and what are their profiles, and in that way we can provide the training, and that provides for a smoother transition. So there are many of this work in progress, but I would say that the key in all this is, first, we will need to review many of our processes, right? And I'll be happy to receive feedback on how this can be done. But at the same time, I want to caution that as a public sector, we also want to have proper accountability for the spending of public funds. So while from a company's point of view, I may not need to worry about who authorizes funding and how much is authorized, because it's my company and one company. But from a public sector point of view, I cannot have one set of rules for company A and another set for company B. Sure. And we have to ensure that it is fair to all, and there has to be proper public accountability. So that said, we are trying to collapse as many of these different schemes as possible into one, so that companies do not have to go from one agency to another agency. We can do it in a much more integrated way. It is work in progress. So for instance, MTI has put together the various schemes into enterprise development grants. Yeah, that's one. And two, it's important for us to raise our management capability across companies. And that is where I hope that our trade associations and chambers can play a role. One reason why we have the Enterprise Leadership Transformation Program, for which we are hoping that we can help to raise the leadership capabilities of many of our companies, is precisely for that purpose. Because the leader of the company managing his team must have that more strategic view and be more creative at problem solving and in bringing together the team. Whereas we must expect that when we do business, there'll be all kinds of problems and obstacles. So on the part of the government agencies, we'll try to make it easier. But I would say that there are certain KPIs of our agencies, in particular the proper use of public funds, that we need to observe. Sure. So if we have a better understanding of each other's needs, we can think of more innovative solutions to solve this problem.
Right. Yeah. But actually, some of the enterprise transformation initiatives have worked.
Yes.
And we have a living example in Toby's company.
Indeed.
Where I believe, Toby, your company, Ademco, received an award a few months ago.
From DPM.
From DPM.
Yes.
on enterprise transformation. Can you explain how your enterprise transformation has helped you with dealing with, for example, the COVID situation?
So I think that first of all, I think it's inevitable that every enterprise has to transform, because if we don't keep ahead,
yes,
it's just not possible, right? You're going to be irrelevant. So the transformation is twofold. Number one would be internal. So even back in 10 years ago, in 2010, we got onto the Salesforce.com platform. We went cloud very, very early. And I remember in those days, right, they were thinking about cloud as far as the mindset was, are you sure it's going to work? Are you going to have enough connectivity? Is it going to be, is that going to be uptime? So, but we jumped right into it, and of course with some help from ESG, thank you very much for the grants. We jump into it, and it's proven to increase our process, speed up our process, enable our service delivery a lot faster. In a case like the COVID-19 right now, every single one of my team can work from home. So long as they have cloud access, they have internet access, they get onto the Salesforce.com, they get onto the Google apps, emails and stuff. Even our accounting system is also on the cloud. So as far as sharing knowledge and making sure that the dissemination of information, making sure that certain standards are adhered to across, not just in Singapore, but across all 7 countries that we operate in, it's very fast. It's very fast. So I think from a service delivery point of view and enabling our employees, in Ademco, it really helps to adopt technology. The second part of it would be actually external. How do we use then the transformation to help us to transform our customers' workflow and work process in order to give them better value and efficiency? And case in point would be, OCBC. we monitor right now over 500 OCBC sites across the island. So in the past, when something happens in one of the locations, they would actually send a security officer all the way out to that site, which might take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 20 minutes, get there and see, what that security situation would be like. But, there isn't that requirement anymore because everything can be done remotely. But that took a lot of conviction, from the OCBC team to say, hey, look, we got to, yes, that's right. What Ademco has said makes sense, and we should transform our process. We got to change our SOPs, and that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to change SOPs in a bank. But the benefit that they got out of it was they reduced our risk because within a minute or two, with eyes on site, we're able to do a risk assessment remotely and see whether there's somebody trying to break in. Next, save money.
Right.
Reduce the cost. Third, there was even operational productivity because in the past, when someone takes, say, money from our ATM machine and they needed to go and do an investigation, they had to go down, shut the ATM down, get the video recording out. There's no need to do so. Encrypted email comes over, we encrypt the video, and it gets sent over. So there's a lot of operational efficiencies in that. And the last part, which was really interesting because, and OCBC totally resonated with it, was we're going green. We don't want to send a vehicle all the way across town just to look at, one of our premises. We've gone green. We've reduced carbon emission with technology.
So Toby's story of this transformation, your company's transformation, I thought you touched on two very interesting points. First is that your own in-company transformations, where you get your staff to work remotely, and that in turn now allows you to work remotely even with COVID-19, and it doesn't quite affect your operation.
Absolutely.
I think there is a lot of scope for us to rethink this aspect of work. What does a workplace really mean? Absolutely. Do you absolutely have to come to a physical location, or can you work remotely? And what can we best use the physical meetings for? And how can we make the best use of technology to work remotely? And the second is your story about how you partner OCBC in this journey. That it's not just the smart supplier that can produce a smart solution, but you also need a smart buyer who's prepared to say, yes, I'm prepared to review the processes. So in fact, innovations like this cannot take place unless everyone has the mindset that I want to do something better and I'm prepared to try to experiment to see how well it works. So to have that innovative mindset to make innovation pervasive in our economy is a critical part of our longer-term transformation. And you will not just solve a long-term problem, it can also solve an immediate problem of can we be more innovative even as we deal with COVID-19? Can we emerge stronger? What is it that we can do that will allow us to manage the risk of this outbreak better and at the same time to continue with things that we need to do?
Right. We in SPH, by the way, are also working remotely. I've made an exception to come to the office today just for this, so we're also there. But I must say
that's
that
a good reason for us to be here, right?
Right, very good.
Yeah.
But I think we have to maybe acknowledge that a lot of workers who it's not possible for them to work remotely.
Indeed.
The people, the customer-facing people,
Right.
for example, the waiters, the people who are there.
Yes.
So I think they would not have that option.
Very much.
So I think maybe if their prospects are affected, I think maybe they need some special help.
Yes.
So that's DPM. We have not talked at all about revenue so far. We've been whatever we've been talking about basically relates to spending, government spending money, and indeed in the budget also there were not that many revenue measures, other than of course the GST, which is going to come in 2021.
That's right.
But it would seem that there would have to be a lot of spending before that.
Yes.
And I just wonder, are there any additional revenue measures that the government is considering? Would you, for example, draw on reserves? Would you, for example, increase the contribution of net investment returns? What options can you consider on the revenue side?
Well, on the revenue side, first, in terms of structural taxes, we are looking at it from a long-term planning point of view. So we do have, a series of possibilities that we are looking at. But given the state of the economy today, I think our priority is on supporting the economy. So you raised about whether are we likely to touch on past reserves. And this is an option that we are looking at very carefully. And our reserves have been set aside to meet the needs of a rainy day. And it looks like this rain is not a light one. So we'll have to look at what we need to do in this. But as part of our process, I cannot touch on this until I have the approval of the President and the Council of Presidential Advisors. This is part of our governance on the use of reserves. So I'm in the midst of looking at various options. But I would say that I'm glad that we have, in this term of government, have a sizable amount of current reserves, which I mentioned at the budget. But still, I'm not ruling out the use of past reserves. And we will have to discuss this very carefully, as we did during the global financial crisis.
That's, you have any thoughts on the revenue side?
I think
Faizal?
essentially, any increase in taxation is definitely going to, not be good for businesses.
Right.
The corporate tax, they're actually watching it as well. In fact, they're asking for more rebates. So, I'm glad you have the reserves, DPM. And, but if, I think probably more needs to be done as well to try and save companies that actually were doing quite well, or and then this COVID-19 happened, and now they actually might go under. So I think the concern is, can it be pushed forward, any sort of assistance, much faster?
So we are looking at the details of the measures that we need, but I would like to make a request for all our businesses. Just as, we cannot run a business on the basis that you'll be blue sky all the time. And the need for us to have some precautionary savings as individuals, as a business, as a country applies throughout. And the need for us to then be able to, in times of need, help one another is important. But I think it will be bad management, either on our personal finance or our company finance, if we have such low level of buffer. So it's very important for us to each have some buffer and emerge stronger of it. Also, I would like to share that during the Asian financial crisis, there were some of the biggest firms in the region were badly affected. But during the global financial crisis, far fewer companies were affected that way. So I was running MAS at that time, and I spoke to some of my fellow governors, particularly from Asia. And I said, well, I see a significant improvement in the responses of your companies. What has changed? Did you have special measures to help these companies quietly? He said, no. We are quite transparent about this. But the big difference is that many of the companies, having gone through the Asian crisis, decided that they must plan their finances differently. And they were, for instance, much more careful about exchange rate risk. You cannot assume the exchange rate will stay at that level. And if you are a major exporter, there will be volatilities in exchange rate which you have to manage. And all the major companies took very good action on that. So it goes back to the earlier point that we discussed about good risk management and how we should bring the association of SMEs and SMEs together with the banks to discuss what good risk management is all about.
DPM, you mentioned the previous crises.
Yes.
If I can ask you, how do you compare this crisis with, for example, the global financial crisis or the Asian crisis? Do you think this has the potential to be as bad as any of those or worse?
So during my budget statement, I made the point that it's important for us not to fight the current war based on the lessons of the last war, because every crisis has similar element to other crises, but it also has differentiating factors which we have to take into account. So how is this different compared to the global financial crisis, and how is this similar? Well, what is similar is that there's been a sharp drop of confidence the disruption to the global economy has been significant. But during the global crisis, it was a crisis of confidence in the financial system, in the banking system. And as a result of which, the impact was largely through financial channels. In this instance, we are dealing with two problems at the same time. The virus and the spread of the virus, for which we actually, while we have some sense of how the scenario might pan out, we cannot be absolutely sure that it will be that way. And in fact, one of the things that we have to do during this crisis is to sketch out what are the possible scenarios. So we have a first draft of it, which we would provide more details to the public later. Based on our contacts with the global experts, based on our own experts, we have some idea of the scenarios in which this could play out, from the very worst scenario to the most optimistic scenario and to a central scenario. Now, in turn, how this virus outbreak is managed and contained will affect the economic scenario. So unlike the global financial crisis, you are now dependent on the containment of the outbreak and not just a pure normal economic engine. And of course, the other major factor is how will the US-China trade conflict and technology conflict and the broader strategic competition be reshaped by this outbreak of the virus? Because I personally feel that when you are dealing with a global pandemic, you need a global response, you need global cooperation. It cannot be that I just safeguard myself. We will have to help one another in this effort. So how that will work out, how the economy will be reshaped by this, will be another major factor. Yeah.
Any other views on comparing the crises?
I was wondering, DPM, the anti-global sentiments that you see prior to the crisis, it's not going to help, obviously, you know.
Yes.
So, and the global response is a bit sketchy initially. What can be done, I mean, in your view, to have a more coordinated global response in terms of trying to manage this COVID-19 issue, to give some sort of reassurance and to communities, to the economy and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I would say the global responses have to be done by global institutions at different levels and for different facets of the economy. One is that the WHO will need to play a critical role in this, in how we bring together the global resources and the global knowledge on handling a virus outbreak like this. And that is really the key mandate of the WHO. So I think it's very important for all of us to cooperate with the WHO, to provide up-to-date information, and to make sure that each of us do not just hide bad news. It is important to be transparent about this, and we can then make a proper assessment of how the virus is spreading or not spreading. And in turn, how we should look at how testing facilities, for instance, can be better done, and that there is a set of minimum responses which all countries ought to have. So I think the WHO has done well so far, but I think that the global cooperation is very much needed. Now, the second is that the global central banks will need to also coordinate the policies, particularly on monetary policy. And I think the monetary policy provides an important stabilization. So the habit of cooperation among global central banks have been building up since the global financial crisis. I hope that it stays. The recent actions have not been very positive in some areas, but I hope that we can continue that discussion. And in particular, the G20 can play an important role in coordinating this response. And within the region, the ASEAN, among the ASEAN plus 3, we can coordinate some of these responses, both to the outbreak as well as to the economic situation and financial situation. And of course, global institutions like the IMF and World Bank must play a key role in this. In particular, the IMF has an important role of maintaining stability And this is where we can build the information and share our assessment of the stability of the global economy. And the World Bank has an important mission of combating global poverty. Now, the virus is not going to respect boundary based on income. And therefore, putting in place good measures across different countries. And I think the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, AIIB can all play a role in strengthening our regional and global responses to this outbreak.
I'm afraid we have run out of time, but there is one question, DPM, I must ask. I think a lot of people want to know.
Yes.
And how is the COVID-19 going to affect the election timetable?
Well, I think first and foremost, at this very moment, we're very focused on A, containing the outbreak, and B, managing this impact on our economy. As I emphasized, that we're looking at how we need to save jobs and how we need to help our companies, especially the SMEs, to go through this. And we're also looking at supporting our frontline well. You mentioned that, in fact, many of our frontline workers have been very courageous, and I'm very glad that fellow Singaporeans have been going out, expressing their support for our frontline. And our frontline workers, the morale has remained very high. So I think Minister Gan Kim and Minister Lawrence Wong, together with the task force, have done a good job in supporting our healthcare workers, in particular at the front line, and also our workers at the various aspects of front line, at our checkpoints, at our ambulance facilities, and so on. So this is what we are focusing on now. But the elections have to be called before April 2021. So we cannot deviate from that. And what we must do is to create the conditions that will allow us to manage this situation as to the best of our ability. And I would say that looking at the global developments, I think the virus outbreak is likely to stay with us for longer. And in fact, as I mentioned, you have so many different waves now coming across in different parts of the world. And how these waves are going to interact with the economic environments in this current economic environment is really quite difficult to predict. And it is important that we have all the management attentions to deal with this. And I'm afraid that the management attention that we need to deal with this will get more challenged in the months ahead, because the situation is so fluid, so dynamic, that I think we need to be able to respond as fully as we can as a country and as a people to this very major uncertainty in our lives, both to our health and also to our lives as well as to our livelihood, because we don't know how the global economy will pan out. So I don't want to be alarmist about this. The best case scenario will be that it reverts to normalcy much faster. But I don't think we should plan on the basis of hoping for the best. We need to be prepared for the worst. And so I hope that we will have the conditions to allow us to do that. And that will be a very major factor in deciding on when we call for the election.
Right, okay. On that sobering but also hopeful note, we have to call this to a close. And thank you, gentlemen, for a wonderful discussion. Thank you, DPM, for making the time to come for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linus. Thank you, Toby.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faizal. And thank you to our viewers for joining us.